Hello and welcome back to the second short college football show. We are now into week 11 of college football, but more importantly, we are now into November, which means that the college football playoff rankings are here. With the arrival of the new rankings comes a lot of changes to this show and how it's going to look. Before we get into anything, make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube to make sure you're staying up to date with everything we've got going on. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and join the Second and Short subreddit, r/2&D A&D Short. Make sure you're listening to the podcast Mondays and Fridays here on YouTube, as well as anywhere that you get your podcasts. And make sure you check out Tuesday's video once you're done here, where Luke gave off his October Team of the Month for the Premier League. Let's talk about the programming change here for the rest of the season for the college football show. Because there's not too many big headlines going on this week, we're not even going to talk any headlines this week. That might change going down the road. If we have something big we need to talk about, we'll certainly talk about it at the beginning of the show. But for this week, we're starting off just going through the college football playoff rankings, which also means we will no longer have my top 10. Instead, if you want to hear me and Colin's top 12 predictions, you'll have to tune into Monday's episodes of the podcast to hear us give off our top 12. So once again, make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube so you see everything that we've got going on. And for now, let's head into the first college football playoff rankings of 2024. The way this segment will work for right now is that I'll start by running through from number 25 through number 15, and then we'll start to have a little bit more of a conversation about the top teams just outside the playoff picture or the ones that are already in the race. That will be followed by us going through what the playoff picture looks like so you have a better idea of who's leading in the conferences, because the seeding and the rankings are going to be very different in the top 12. At number 14, on the outside looking in, is Texas A&M, coming off of that big loss to South Carolina last week. Their first loss in conference play. Certainly a interesting look for Texas A&M as we continue to go through the year, because they don't really have much outside of that final week against Texas. At number 13 is SMU. After a commanding win over previously undefeated Pitt, SMU continues to prove to the nation that they are the real deal. Their one loss this season comes against a BYU team that, if you haven't realized, we haven't mentioned yet. So SMU is looking very, very impressive and potentially making a run at the ACC championship, because right now they sit second in the ACC after Clemson's upset loss. Then at number 12, both seeding and ranking wise, is Boise State. Now, I'm not going to get into all the rules and everything of how the seeding actually works, but Boise State is currently the 5th highest ranked potential conference champion / group of 5 bid team, which means if they were outside of the top 12, they would still get the 12th seed. But if they're within the top 12, they'll get whatever seed that they're currently at. After Boise State, at number 11, just barely getting in, is the Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama can certainly consider themselves lucky, because at the same time, there is 3 two-loss SEC teams right outside of the playoff picture. Alabama, lucky to sneak in at number 11. Number 10 is Notre Dame, one that some people have some questions about, but they have undoubtedly won every single game outside of one of the worst losses, probably the worst loss of any of the current top 25 teams, to Northern Illinois earlier this year. But Notre Dame is winning games, so you have to give them the credit for that. There is a discussion to be had about where they should be ranked and where they are ranked now. Then we get to the undefeated Big 12 leaders. BYU comes in at 9. They're another team with a little bit of a claim for potentially higher seeding. There's quite a few people arguing about it right now. We'll just have to see what BYU has to offer, because right now they are storming through the Big 12 and looking to make a huge push forward. At number 8, we have the other undefeated team that is potentially not getting as much credit as some people want, and that's Indiana. To Indiana's credit, they have looked extremely good with what they've had to work with. But what they've had to work with is the 103rd strongest schedule in college football. Obviously, the big thing for Indiana is that a few weeks down the road, they've got Ohio State, and that is the only game that matters outside of obviously just getting some wins for the remainder of the season. Next at number 7 is Tennessee. Obviously, we all know about the upset loss against Arkansas. Outside of that game, Tennessee has undoubtedly done one thing, and it is find ways to win. Maybe not in the most impressive ways, but they're winning, and they're winning by margins that are relatively impressive. Also, that win over Alabama is huge for their position right now. Above Tennessee is Penn State at number 6. They obviously got their first loss of the season last week to Ohio State, but a lot of things changing up at the top, and Penn State is lucky to find themselves still this highly ranked after a loss to Ohio State. Because outside of Ohio State, they really haven't proved all that much against top tier opponents. And with that loss to Ohio State, you likely won't see them in the Big Ten championship. So Penn State just has to kind of sit around and hope that somebody else messes up that will keep them here in the playoff conversation. At number 5 is Texas. They are 7-1 with a loss to Georgia. And when it's come to Texas, the real question mark is, can they do it against a top team? Texas hasn't necessarily played the hardest schedule for their first year in the SEC. And with a remaining schedule that doesn't necessarily have a lot of prove-it games left, Texas has to hope that nobody outshines them and nobody catches them off guard later this year. Then we get into the top 4, and it starts with Miami. The undefeated Miami Hurricanes continue to lead the ACC, but sit alone at the top now with Clemson falling off, now scheduled to face SMU as it stands in the ACC championship. Miami, though they are undefeated and a Power 4 school, have played way too many close games, and I think that's the biggest reason why you find them behind a one-loss Ohio State and one-loss Georgia team. So let's talk about the order of those two one-loss teams. At number 3 is Georgia. Then at number 2 is Ohio State. And I put these two together because their explanations go hand in hand. These two were probably the biggest topic of conversation heading into this first ranking. Who will be 2 and who will be 3? And College Football Playoff Committee Chair and Michigan Athletic Director Ward Manuel gave his explanation. And it was simply just that Ohio State's one loss is to number 1 Oregon, spoiler alert, and Georgia's one loss is to number 11 Alabama. Otherwise, they think what they've seen this year is great from both of these teams, and some could argue that there has been bad moments for both. I tend to agree with what Ward Manuel had to say. You can give Ohio State this spot now, but when Georgia faces the remainder of this schedule, you certainly can't deny that if they win out, they should be the number 2 team at least. Ohio State, on the other hand, still has some teams to deal with for the remainder of their schedule. Most notably is Indiana. They've likely got a rematch with Oregon coming up in the Big Ten Championship and have the opportunity to really shake some things up here at the top. Then at number 1, like I already said, it's the Oregon Ducks. Dan Lanning and Dylan Gabriel and the rest of this extremely talented squad are 9-0. They've got that 1-point victory over Ohio State that changes the course of everything for their season. But Oregon can't feel secure. Yes, they have a relatively easy schedule to ride it out, but that Big Ten championship game could prove to be a huge issue for Oregon if they don't look 100%. Now, before we move on, because this is the first ranking, I want to talk about some teams that maybe should be mad about where they're starting off in the college football playoff rankings. So I'm going to start from maybe least reasons to be mad to most reasons to be mad, and we'll do a top 3 here. I'm going to start with Ole Miss because there are 3 teams currently ranked ahead of them that are also 2-loss SEC teams. One of them is LSU, which makes sense because they have the head-to-head over Ole Miss. But the other 2, I don't see quite as much to go off of. Texas A&M's coming off of a blowout upset against South Carolina. And then 2-loss Alabama is in the playoff picture right now because of what? Preferential treatment because of a culture that is long gone? So I'd say that Ole Miss does have a little bit to be mad about because of the people that are ranked ahead of them, but they have to worry about what's going on this weekend because they've got Georgia this weekend, and if you fall to 3 losses, you can say goodbye to the playoff picture. Our next team is the one right on the outside looking in. It's SMU. They're a 1-loss team in a Power 4 conference, and they're currently sitting outside of the playoff. And their one loss is to a number 9 BYU team. And that game was a nail-biter all the way to the end, and it was played prior to their quarterback change, which has shown an explosion of offense. They're also ranked behind a Notre Dame team that has a way worse loss on their resume. And when you put the 2 teams up side by side, you have the 1 losses being BYU compared to Northern Illinois. They have one mutual opponent, and both of them beat them. It was Louisville, and they both beat them by 1 touchdown. And when it comes down to it, SMU is getting screwed because of history. But wouldn't history tell you that Notre Dame always falls short? So why not give SMU a chance? And obviously SMU is mad because Also, they're outside the playoff, but Boise State and Alabama should probably be upset that Notre Dame's ahead of them too. Boise State's got one loss, and it was against Oregon, and they only lost by 3 points. And finally, it is the team that beat the aforementioned SMU Mustangs. It's number 9 BYU. BYU has simply done everything they could this season. They have tried to prove to the nation that they are for real, and they still put the clear best team in the Big 12 at number 9. That's only 3 spots ahead of a one-loss Mountain West team in Boise State. You've got an undefeated Power 4 leading BYU team behind Indiana. Indiana's got the 103rd hardest schedule this season. You've got them behind a Tennessee team where they lost to Arkansas this season. Then is a Texas team that's played a similarly strong schedule to BYU, and their one loss was an embarrassment by Georgia. To go further, they're behind Penn State, who, yes, kept it close with Ohio State. They still lost, and they haven't really played anybody else of note. And on top of that, not to say that BYU should be ranked ahead of Ohio State, but Ohio State has a worse strength of record than BYU this season. BYU has 2 wins this season over teams that are now ranked in the college football playoff rankings. That's super important because a lot of teams will just claim a top 25 win over a team that was number 24 for 1 week, and it was week 3. Meanwhile, BYU has 2 wins over teams that are currently ranked, which is more than Texas, Tennessee, Penn State, Indiana, and Ohio State combined. So just give BYU some love next week. That is all for the first college football playoff ranking. We won't have nearly as much to talk about. We won't do like the who should be mad next week. But let's go on and talk about the top matchups heading into week 11. If you missed last week's episode, I explained how there might be a few matchups going forward where I'm going to have to do some explaining on why they're top matchups. And let's just say this is one of them. So we're starting off the top matchups this week with South Carolina versus Vanderbilt. And honestly, I just think it's because this matchup might just have the fireworks that we're looking for. You got 2 QBs that have kind of come out of nowhere and just lit the SEC on fire. Like, they have had some amazing performances against some of the best teams in the nation. The fun thing about these teams is that they've both been elite underdogs this season. But somebody's got to be the favorite, and it's South Carolina. Neither of these teams are in the playoff picture. That's pretty obvious. When we're talking about the quality of the bowl games that these teams are trying to find, this is pivotal. South Carolina's currently at 5 wins, and they've got Wofford waiting for them in a couple of weeks to get them that 6th win to secure bowl eligibility. But their other 2 opponents are Mizzou and Clemson, which aren't cakewalks. Vandy, on the other side, is bowl eligible already with their 6th win, but they've only got 2 more opportunities after South Carolina, and it's against LSU and then Tennessee. So both of these teams need and want a win here. So I have a feeling we're just going to see a great fight between these 2 teams. If I've got to pick, I'm going to continue to roll with the magic that has come from Vanderbilt and side with the Commodores. Now, our next top matchup of the week is number 20 Colorado taking on Texas Tech in Lubbock. Colorado is very much still alive when we talk about the college football playoff picture, but they're getting to that point where they're about to go from thriving to surviving. Yeah, they're hanging on, but how long can they hold on? And if they hold on, will they get anything out of it? They looked out last week with an Iowa State loss, and now the Buffaloes sit patiently behind Iowa State, hoping for a chance to get in to the Big 12 Conference Championship game. And that would be their key in. If they can show up and get to that Conference Championship game and make a huge upset and beat BYU, Colorado will be in the playoff. Unfortunately for Colorado, while they were watching Iowa State lose, they had to start game planning for Iowa State's opponent. Texas Tech is coming off of this huge upset victory, and they've just been a frisky team all year. They've gone out and beat the hell out of some teams. They've gone out and played it really close with some teams, and right now, they are fighting for a bowl game. They just took down an Iowa State team that has been undefeated to this point and has been absolutely rolling through teams, and now they get to go up against a Colorado team that's been kind of doing the same. To Colorado's credit, they certainly edge out Iowa State in talent, and Texas Tech for that matter, but with Colorado, every single time they have a big game, the question is, will they put that talent on display? Sure, Shedeur Sanders goes out and he could throw 350, 400 passing yards and a couple of touchdowns and whatnot, but will it win them the game? He's done it in plenty of losses in his career, but will this team put up a complete performance that gets them a much-needed victory late in a season where they're making a true playoff push. I think Colorado does pull it out. I think it'll be really close. I think it'll be really high scoring, but I think Colorado can pull it out. On to our next game, number 3 Georgia, heading on the road, taking on number 16 Ole Miss. Look, if history wants to repeat itself here for Georgia, I wouldn't be surprised. This is what Georgia does best. They use these last couple weeks of the season where they end up facing some high-ranked opponents and just totally wipe the slate clean from all the madness, all the close games and the losses, whatever happened earlier in the year, everybody forgets about at the end of the season for Georgia. And all that madness that's happened is the reason you're number 3 right now behind Ohio State. So you've got to rewrite your wrongs here. And with Ole Miss this week, Tennessee the following week, you've got a chance to do it. The biggest problem is that in past years, you didn't have Carson Beck playing this bad. Yeah, last year you had Carson Beck. He was not playing nearly this bad. Somebody's got to figure out what has caused 11 interceptions this year. And if they can't figure out what the problem is, and if they can't stop that problem, he needs to get benched. I'm surprised he didn't get benched after the first half against Florida. So now I'm starting to think that maybe Kirby Smart or Mike Bobo, whoever it is, doesn't have the balls to sit Carson Beck. And when you've got an Ole Miss team that you're going to play, and they are coming into this game just riding high, you've got to be worried. Ole Miss just went out, took care of business in Fayetteville, and now they've got a UGA team that just struggled against Florida coming to town. And they're not just showing up, they're playing in Oxford in a huge, high-pressure situation. But you also can't forget that Ole Miss has got the pressure on them too. We talked about why they're mad about the college football playoff ranking. There really is a route for them to make the college football playoff, but if you lose here, it's over. If you win here and you win out, then your players better start thinking about what they're going to be doing 5 days before Christmas. Right now, I just can't deny the fact that Georgia just finds a way to win. I hate to say it because Carson Beck has been atrocious, and I've loved what I've seen from Ole Miss's offense. But this one is one of those games where it comes down to coaching, and Lane Kiffin just doesn't get it done for me. I've talked about it in the past. I'm not going to sound like a broken record here. Lane Kiffin just doesn't do it for me. Kirby Smart has shown resiliency time and time again. So give me the Bulldogs, but I do think that Ole Miss will give them a game. Our final top matchup of the week. It's another big one in the SEC. Number 11 Alabama taking on number 14 LSU. We've got a night game in Death Valley, and this one's for survival. Alabama has got to prove for the rest of the season that they deserve to stay in the college football playoff. And right now at number 11, you really got to try because there's a bunch of teams right outside that are looking to steal your spot. But on top of that, even if they do win out, they still have to prove that they're better than some of the teams right around them. Meanwhile, LSU is on the outside looking in, still behind Texas A&M as well, and SMU and Boise State. So LSU really has to show off here. And if they can get a big win, it's huge. But for Alabama, this one kind of means more. The playoff committee is going to see a victory on the road in Death Valley at night as a huge win for Alabama. If LSU wins, yeah, it's a big win for LSU as well, but it was a home game, and it was an Alabama team that's not like past years. They are going to get the excuses. Every single time, Alabama will get the excuses, at least for right now, because like I talked about earlier, they're still riding off of just a culture that doesn't exist there anymore. I'm not even going to break down what's going to happen in this game because I think it's such a toss-up between these two teams. Just expect it to go all the way to the end, if I had to guess. And I'm going to go with the Tigers. I don't love Alabama right now, and they just continue to concern me week by week. So give me the LSU Tigers, mainly because of that hard-fought overtime win over Ole Miss. Gives me the confidence that they can go out and win close games. All right, those were your top matchups. Now, let's talk about the ones to watch this weekend. We will start off with number 25 Army taking on North Texas. Army is still waiting on Bryson Daly to get back healthy after missing last week's game against Air Force. And from what I saw from them last week, they are going to need him because Eric Morris has been running a high-flying offense at North Texas, and they don't stop for anybody. Only Texas Tech this season has held North Texas under 35 points. And since that game, they've only had under 40 points one time. But Army's offense with Bryson Daly can put up numbers as well. The problem is that last week's shortcomings against 1-7 Air Force are not going to cut it against this North Texas team. They will just simply outscore you. So with Bryson Daly starting, you can expect a high-scoring affair in Denton, Texas. Without Daly, I would expect Chandler Morris and the Mean Green to break the hearts of Americans everywhere. Our next game is number 23 Clemson taking on Virginia Tech. What the hell happened, Dabo? What the hell did you turn this program into? Louisville? Like that, too? That was just embarrassing. Look, I don't like Dabo. Everybody knows that. But what I will say is I respect his program, and I respect what he built at Clemson, but I never thought it would get this bad. I sat here last week and told y'all that Clemson just needed to find a number one weapon on this offense for Cade Klubnik, or Louisville would just find some more magic and they would come out with a win. So I'll say this, Cade Klubnik did not find his guy. And on the other side of this matchup this week, Virginia Tech is not messing around. On the other side of this matchup, Virginia Tech is not messing around. At 5-4, they've got Duke still on the schedule, and they've got their rivalry matchup with Virginia to close out the season. Virginia Tech wants to secure bowl eligibility, and they'd like to do it sooner rather than later. And I'll be honest, they're more than capable of it if we see the same Clemson team that we saw last week. So once again, I'm giving Clemson an ultimatum. You can expect one of two things. Either Clemson comes out like last week and Virginia Tech gives them a game and maybe takes home a win, or Clemson comes back looking for blood and they find it in Blacksburg. Our next one to watch is Oklahoma State taking on TCU. You might think I'm crazy for this one. And look, yes, I did put Oklahoma State in my ones to watch 2 weeks in a row. Yes, I am aware they've lost 6 straight games. But last week, they didn't necessarily disappoint. Well, they disappointed, for sure. They've lost 6 straight games. They're disappointed. But the matchup didn't disappoint against Arizona State because Arizona State rose to the occasion. We saw some great performances. Meanwhile, Oklahoma State, they dropped to 3-6 with that 6th consecutive loss. But I'm giving them another chance to give me a good game. And this time it's with TCU, who is no stranger to giving us some entertainment this season. Just in the last 2 weeks, their games have been decided by 3 or less points. And in those 2 games, both teams scored 30 points. And in those 2 games, both teams in the game have scored in the 30s. So why can't we just catch more madness at the bottom of the Big 12? Our final matchup to watch this weekend is Oklahoma taking on number 24 Missouri. I'm really only putting this here because I think it's a big test for Missouri. For some reason, the College Football Playoff Committee decided to show Missouri some respect by putting them at 24. I don't think they deserve this respect, and I think this is the right matchup to test that. Look, Missouri's been bad, but Oklahoma is bad. And we're all very well aware of that. But with 5 wins, Oklahoma is still looking to be bowl eligible this season, even though they would potentially end the season with 2 conference wins. And with their final games after this being against LSU and Alabama, Mizzou is their best chance to capture a victory and still be bowl eligible this season. So Oklahoma's coming in as a hungry dog, and Missouri's just trying to prove that they deserve the respect they were given. I think I'm going to go with Missouri, and they'll probably blow out Oklahoma, but if we see the same Missouri team that we've seen struggle for the last couple of weeks, I have no idea what we'll get. Those were the ones to watch this week. Let's round it out with my Week 11 picks. Before we get into the picks, I'd like to remind everybody I am 21 years of age, but I do not live in a gambling state, which means I will not be placing any wagers on any of the picks that I make today. These are simply just my thoughts on some of the lines I've seen this week. If you will be placing any wagers on these picks, please make sure to only bet within your means and bet responsibly. And if you do have a gambling problem, please call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, if you haven't been along for the ride this season, this show started in week 3 of college football. We've been doing 3 picks a week every week. Last week, and for a number of weeks prior, we've gone 2-1. That brings us to 16-8 on the season. And I want to break the curse. I feel like we're just not trending in the right direction. We need a 3-0 to break the streak of 2-1s, and this is the week. So to start things off, I'm going to Old Reliable. They did me right last week. They've done me right all season. I'm taking Indiana minus 14 against Michigan. Indiana are now 6-0 straight up and against the spread in the Big Ten this season. And head coach Kurt Cignetti, I've brought up the stats week by week. He's now 23-9 against the spread in his career between Indiana and James Madison. And in his last 19 games that he's coached, he's 18-1 straight up, 16-3 against the spread. And on the other side of this matchup is Michigan, who has been abysmal when it comes to covering this season and just in general. They're 2-7 against the spread this year. This pick is just me simply riding the hot hand. Look, if Indiana ends up upsetting me this week, so be it. They have been so great to me. They have earned my respect. Same goes for Kurt Cignetti, and I've got to just keep picking them. You can't stop feeding the hot hand, and this one's a heat check. Next pick, I've got Vandy plus 3.5 against South Carolina. This really just comes down to, if you want me to stop picking Vandy, stop making them an underdog. This season, Vanderbilt is 6-0 against the spread when they are underdogs. And over the past couple weeks, we've talked about the fact that SEC underdogs have been unbelievable against the spread. So give me Vanderbilt to cover the spread against a South Carolina team that kind of just plays the same exact role as them. My final pick, and I think it's a bit of a ballsy one, but I really like it. It's Oregon minus 25 against Maryland. I typically try to avoid the big numbers, but Oregon has been undeniably good. And on top of it, there's a big stat that I want to talk about that I haven't really mentioned this season. First, let's talk about Maryland, because in the past 20 years, they have been horrendous when they head west. They've only actually played outside of Eastern Standard Time 18 times in the last 20 years. But in those games, they're 4-14 against the spread. And in the last 10 games in this scenario, they've only covered once. This is going to be just their third game in the Pacific time zone in the last 20 years, and their first since 2009. And in those two games, they were 0-2 against the spread, and they got outscored 73-27. But the stat that I've wanted to bring up is that Big Ten expansion has clearly been the worst when it comes to teams having to travel across the country. We talked about it being a huge issue, and it certainly has been. Big Ten teams are 2-5 against the spread when traveling from Eastern Standard Time to Pacific Standard Time in back-to-back weeks. And that is the scenario that Maryland finds themselves in. And going up against the number one team, I think Oregon just has all the hope in the world that they are going to go out, they're going to stomp Maryland and continue this fantastic campaign. So give me Oregon minus 25. All right, y'all, this might have been a little bit of a longer one. I obviously haven't edited everything yet, but thank you guys for watching. This has been a super, super fun season of football, and we've still got a few more weeks to go. So make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube to stay up to date with everything we've got going on. Make sure once you're done here to hop over to Luke's video from Tuesday here on Second and Short, where he did his October Team of the Month for the Premier League. Make sure you're listening to the podcast. New episodes every Monday and Friday here on YouTube, as well as anywhere that you get your podcasts. And make sure you join the Second and Short subreddit. That is r/2ND Short. Once again, I appreciate everybody taking their time to watch this episode. I will see you guys either this Friday on the pod, maybe next Monday on the pod, or see you guys right back here next Thursday for the College Football Show. Catch you guys later. Peace.